we're so privileged to have Dr. Gish here tonight. He had the first creation evolution debate on campus when I was there, debating my chemistry professor, Dr. Goodman, and that was a tremendous thing. And so there was a lot of buzz on campus about creation and evolution and so forth. And after that debate or another one after that, then nobody would debate Dr. Gish anymore because he had these zingers that he would say that that takes more faith than I have God and things like that. But there was one time when it was a real eye-opener for me, and that was then I was trying to understand what it is about why these people believe this preposterous theory of evolution. And so I was discussing with a teacher of mine there, and our voices were getting a little bit loud and agitated. And he was, saying evolution is true, and I was saying, no, it's not, it couldn't happen, and so forth. And so he got up out of his chair, and he walked around me to close the door, because he didn't want to have his colleagues hear this discussion going on. And as he shut the door to his office, there was an immoral pinup on the back of his door. And that was a moment of aha for me, because, I saw that, and I looked at him, and the light went on, and I said, you don't have an intellectual problem. You have a moral problem. And I said, I'm sorry to waste your time. And I got up and I walked out. And from that moment, I realized that the solution to the problem of evolution is not an intellectual one, it's a heart one. It's the power of the gospel to change the heart. Once the heart is converted, all those things are like chump change. They just fall into place. And so we're so glad tonight, as I mentioned, to have Bob Jones himself. There were 4 presidents of Bob Jones during this history since 1927. We have 2 of them here tonight. So, and I'm sure the other 2 would be here if they could, but they can't. So anyway, I just wanted to say welcome to the museum. As you go through, you'll see that there's a pulsation. There's a pulsation in me that the time is very short. And if the time is short, and every time you read an obituary, or you walk through a cemetery, or you take a look at those dead fossils out there, you're impressed with the fact that we don't have forever to get this job done. It's a very short amount of time. And I don't know what our thoughts are going to be when we actually pass into eternity, or pass from this life. But I can just imagine that for many of us, when the shock of it comes, that the thought that's going to come to our mind is, so soon, Lord? So soon? And with that thought in mind, then it all the more drives us to get the gospel to the lost. To be like the Lord who said, the Son of Man has come to seek, that means go look for, work at, and to save that which was lost. And so, as you go through the museum, this is the goal of the museum. The goal of the museum is not to present facts and information. The goal of the museum is to bring people to understand that who made us is a faithful person. And he also wants to save us. And so therefore we can have confidence to commit the keeping of our soul unto him as unto a faithful creator. So thank you so much for your being friends in the museum, for praying. I know many of you pray, and I thank you for that, and for being here tonight. Thank you.
I'm Bob Jorgensen, and I've had the privilege to meet many of you this evening and hope to find time to meet more of you. I've had the exciting opportunity to come on this summer as the West Coast representative for Bob Jones University. Several... I can sit down now. This is great. But many of you have said that you would like to have closer ties. It's 3,000 miles to the East Coast. And so upon hearing that, part of the plan is placing a representative on the West Coast. Just having someone to call that you don't have to fight the time zones really helps. You say, well, I think I'll give the school a call, but it's 6 o'clock. It's 9 o'clock there. Everything's shut down. So give me a call instead, and we'll work that out. I'll share with you a little bit later the excitement it is for me to be able to represent a school like this. It truly is a privilege, and especially as I meet more and more of the alumni and the friends of the university. My job right now, though, is to introduce Dr. Bob. Many of you know Dr. Bob III, and needs little introduction. I think as you find out more of the university and its history and the way that it's been standing strong for the Lord through the years, knowing the person that would lead that is the kind of introduction, a man that is strong and stays true. And as the torch has been passed through till now his son Stephen, we find that that continuance is really the testimony. So Dr. Bob, without any final ado, I know you have things you'd like to share with this group this evening. Dr. Bob.
Hey, y'all. It is just, I've just got to take the sight in here because I've been sitting here with my back toward all of you, and I'm just enjoying this moment to see you face to face. There's a great mixture of young and old here tonight. The university is 87 years old this year. And so it has spanned a lot of generations. You, and in some cases, your children, your grandchildren. 26, Mrs. Andrews, 26 children and grandchildren. Mrs. Andrews at that time from Maine, and what a phenomenal thing. I'm not sure I've ever known a family with more or anywhere close to that many. We're especially glad to have you here, Mrs. Andrews. 26 children, grandchildren, all went to BJU. I want to just say to you families, thank you for letting university serve you. Thank you for trusting your children and your grandchildren to it. It's a long way from the West Coast. I remember when some of us were in school that California was in the top 10 in terms of the largest numbers of students from any state. I think it was actually in the top 5 at one time. That's changed a lot in recent years. There are colleges now that are closer and all kinds of things. But it's never been easier to come than it is now. It took us 4.5 hours from Atlanta yesterday. Some of you, when you came, you drove 50 or 55 hours nonstop across the country. And you did it 4 times a year. But we treasure the graduates. There's a bond, and I can't explain it. I talk to the students about it, and current students can't understand this, but it's a BJU family kind of thing, and that wherever you go in life, as you meet each other and you've had this bond, it's like you've just always known each other. I want to thank you who are first-timers here tonight. My wife came to BJU from Phoenix, Arizona. She had never heard of the place, but a Christian high school teacher in her senior year of high school said, you have some talents they could train back there. She was headed to another Christian college, and she talked it over with her folks, and they said, well, it seems like maybe that's God's leading. So she got on a Greyhound bus. It took her 70 hours on a Greyhound bus. Now, they did have paved roads then, so I don't want you to get the wrong idea of her being a pioneer woman in a bonnet or anything like that. But when I get to heaven, I'll sure look forward to hugging the neck of that teacher who pointed her that way. Her mother said, don't you dare come back with a southern drawl. But she made no prohibition about a southern husband, so I'm really thankful for that. But for those of you that aren't that familiar, let me just share a little history if I can. And I do this for your encouragement. I tell people if there's anything good about BJU, God has done it. And if it's bad, and there's plenty of that, we've done it. But God is always faithful. You know that. You who know Him know that. And there's no other explanation for the university except it's a miracle from the hand of God. It was founded by my grandfather when he was an evangelist. He and Billy Santee were contemporaries. And some of you were on campus and heard Billy Santee. Dottie, we saw some pictures tonight that you brought. Billy Santee and Harry Ironside and all of those wonderful men of God. And in that era, my grandfather felt led of God to start the college because in his travels as an evangelist, he found young people who had had their faith stolen and their morals destroyed at college. And he had this burden, and he said to my grandmother in a little sandwich shop where they stopped one day in Kissimmee, Florida, which is now Disney, way back when, and he said, I'm going to start a college. And she said, well, you must be crazy. You don't know a thing about education. Well, he said, no, I don't, but I can borrow the educational brain. He knew his limitations. Blessed is the man who knows his limitations. And he borrowed the brains. And God enabled him to have a team of educators that came alongside, and God is still bringing people like that today. And the little college started in North Florida with 85 students. And then the Depression hit 2 years later, and the banks were all broke. There was no money. And I guess those were horrifying years. I wasn't around then. I've only heard of those years. But my father was a 15-year-old boy at the time the college was started. And my grandfather started BJ Academy for his potentially wayward son. He was worried about his son, he said. And so he started the academy. Back before there were Christian high schools like now there are so many of, Christian high schools. And there was no food, there was no money, and the best they could do was to have occasionally some vegetables from their parents' gardens. Instead of tuition money, they brought vegetables. And being in the South, there was lots of collard greens. And my dad, till his dying day, hated collard greens. And he said that the students all made fun and said, you know, if we keep eating this breakfast, lunch, and dinner, BJC is not going to be Bob Jones College. It'll be Big Juicy Collards. But anyway, the little college grew, and God moved it up to Tennessee after the war years, where some of you first got acquainted with it, and then on to Greenville in 1947. The third move, which thankfully has been our last, and I trust will always be our last until we move to heaven. My grandmother told him at that time, if you keep moving this school, they're going to call this U-Haul University. Well, we're thankful to be where God has planted us, and we're thankful for the great memories of those years that so many of you were there. Some of you met your spouses there, as I did. How many of you met your spouse at BJU? Just look around at this. Just look around at this. That's fantastic. Some of you younger people here tonight, remember that, okay? It's a happy hunting ground, okay? It really is. I mean, you go to the state university, what chance are you going to have? It's really a needle in a haystack deal there. By the way, you know, all education is brainwashing. I know you know that. It's a matter of what you want your brain washed with. Every teacher is teaching from a worldview, a philosophy, a way he looks at the world, life. Whether he be an atheist, an evolutionist, communist, behaviorist, hedonist, whatever he may be, that's the lens through which his teaching passes. And, you know, I tell people sometimes state colleges are really great for training pagans. They do a great job of that. That's their specialty. It doesn't mean a Christian can't go there and not come out still a Christian. Of course he can. And many of you have. But it's in spite of them that you did. The Christian University, BJU, we specialize in training warm-hearted, fervent, evangelistic-minded, Bible-believing disciples of Christ, Christ-loving graduates. That's our specialty. Now, we don't always succeed. I wish we did. It really bothered my grandfather that he didn't have 100% success in all the graduates. Many of them would turn out to be worthless worldlings. But he said one day it seemed like the Lord impressed on his heart that the Lord had a little school of 12, and one of them was a devil. I've often sat in churches on the platform before preaching and looked out at that crowd and saying, wonder if the ratio is still 1 in 12. 1, 2. Where do I start counting? You know? Somewhere else. And then he said, and then there was Peter, who cursed and swore under pressure and said he never knew the founder of the school at Caiaphas' judgment hall that night. So he said, of course, we're not going to have 100% success either. That comforted him. So we can train some good pagans too, and we do. But that's not our specialty. You know, they can come and still go out a pagan. They can put on a good act. Churches are full of people like that. Other colleges are full of people like that. They just don't know Christ. Say the language and all the rest. But we specialize in trying to train Christ-loving people. I tell young people, I say, look, not all you young people should even think about coming to Bob Jones University. The only people who should really think about this are people who love the Lord and want to love Him more during the 4 years they're there. You will be happy. And if you're not that kind of person, don't come, because we wouldn't want you and you wouldn't want us. It just wouldn't work. And, you know, by the grace of God, the school is basically, if you came back today, you would see wonderful new facilities, and God's been so good. And by God's grace, it's all paid for. My grandfather's philosophy was don't go in debt. They did that originally in Florida until the Depression hit, and it was so devastating. He said, you never need anything bad enough to go in debt for it. He said, this is God's school. Don't put it in the hands of the lending institutions. He says, wait until you have the money, and then if you need it, obtain it. And that, again, I want to hug his neck also in heaven, because that has sure kept the school through some very hard times. And really, if you came and visited there, what you would see would be the clothes on our back. You'll see a beautiful plant that by the grace of God is paid for. And I must confess to you that there are times, as in 2 mornings ago, when I read our local newspaper eating breakfast, Furman University, just a completely apostate place, started out as a Christian school 180 years ago or whatever. A couple just left them $5 million. And I have to ask the Lord's forgiveness. I shouldn't, I'm really trying to get to the place in life where I don't have this feeling inside. But I read something like that, or it may be Clemson that's 30 miles from us, or the University of South Carolina, the USC of the South. 10 million, 25 million, or whatever. And I say, Lord, we have these big needs, and then I'm rebuked, because He's enabled us to pay every bill. And it's usually just in time. Real quick story for your encouragement, because it's the faithfulness of God I'm talking about here. When my father died in 1997, some graduates called and said, well, what will the school do in your dad's memory? I said, well, it's never crossed my mind. He said, well, you ought to do something. I said, well, okay, well, let me think about it. Then it dawned on me that Dad and I had talked often about the need of a seminary building. There'd always been a seminary since we moved in 47 to South Carolina. But they'd met in the regular classrooms and all. And so we began some effort to get some money together to build a seminary building. And there were cost overruns, as there always are. We came very near to having to pay up all the bills at the end, and we were short about $1 million. And boy, we prayed so hard. And the business manager got a call. Roy Barton got a call. And this executrix of an estate in Alabama said, I've been preparing the tax returns for this lady, Miss So-and-so, for all these years, and she's left all of her estate to the university, and I don't know what it is yet, but it will be substantial, and just want you to know, I'll let you know more later. Well, Roy Barton went to the files, and there was nothing in there about this lady. Her name never appeared anywhere. None of us knew of her. So he called the lawyer back, and she said, well, I remember once she said someday she wanted to do something to help that boys' school up in South Carolina. Well, this was really puzzling. Boys' school. And then it dawned on our business manager, the preacher boys. She was from Alabama, my grandfather's home state, where he's preached all over the place. Maybe as a little girl, she or her parents heard about his preacher boys. And by the way, they're still dear to our hearts. And she died, and when her estate check arrived, it was just $20,000 short of $1 million, which is what we needed to pay for that building. But think about this, 60, 70, whatever years ago, God, by His divine appointment, had arranged all of that, and it came just at the moment of the need for a place where the preacher boys would be trained. This is how God has taken care of this place all these years. When I was a little boy, wanting to be with my grandfather all I could, I would often go for a ride. I'd walk by his back door coming to my house every afternoon after school. Sometimes he'd wave me in and say, son, let's have a Coca-Cola or some ice cream, cookies. And then he'd say, how would you like to go for a ride? I'd say, oh, Pop, I'd like that. And being a farmer's son from southern Alabama, we'd go out in the countryside, usually the same route, about a half hour long, and come back. And as we would drive down the campus from east to west, the campus on the left, he'd look over there as he drove the car. Look what God has done. That's a miracle. Isn't God good? That's just a miracle, son. It's just a miracle. I wish I had $1 for every time he said those words when I was growing up. He never got over that this was a miracle of God. By human odds, it shouldn't exist. It's old-fashioned. It's out of step, if you will, with an age that's out of joint. I don't know how else to express it. It always has been, and it is. And I don't ever want it to become anything else. Our son Stephen, who's president now for 6 years, he's fervently committed, and his whole executive team fervently committed that by the grace of God, till Jesus comes, this will be a place where we yield to biblical authority the best we know how, to what the Bible says, regardless of the consequences. I remember as a boy growing up, well, as a college student actually, hearing my grandfather preach again and again and say, by God's grace, we're going to do right. Even if we have to close this school, we're going to do right. And there were times when in doing what he felt was right, there were dire consequences to the enrollment, to the economics of the school. But by the grace of God, knowing he would look the Lord in the face one day, he tried to do what he felt was right and biblical. And I remember hearing him say, there doesn't have to be a Bob Jones University, but as long as there is one, it has to stand for the Bible. Well, that was drilled in me. And I'm so thankful I heard it so many times. And we've tried to drill that into each succeeding generation of faculty and staff. And I know it's in the heart of the President, Stephen. It's in his heart as much as it's ever been in any of his predecessors who sat in that same chair. And I don't think you graduates would ever want it to be any other way. I don't think you'd want it to be any other way. My heart aches for people. And I meet them who say, I went to such and such of a Christian college, and it's changed. doesn't believe the Bible anymore. It doesn't believe in creationism anymore. It doesn't believe the first 12 chapters of Genesis are true. It doesn't believe in these things. And you can see their heart bleeding in the words that they speak. You can hear it in their voice. And when I do hear that, I say, Lord, please preserve this place so we'll never have to ever hear that from a graduate. It's God's place. And His Word doesn't change. His Word doesn't change. All around us, change in Christian circles is bewildering, baffling, troubling. I think 20 years from now, if the Lord tarries, what will the church look like? I mean, it looks so much like the culture at large now. What is it going to look like in another 20 or 30 years? I just hope the Lord will be back way sooner than that, and I believe He's coming really soon. But we're going to have to start over with a new generation. And I want to leave you with this. I was reading even today in Psalm 78, where the psalmists talk about the dark sayings of old. What he was saying there, the things we in Israel used to hear from our fathers and know, the truth we used to hear, but now it's so old, it's dark, we haven't heard it for years. And he said, but we need to teach it to our children again, so they may not be like their fathers. And then the whole rest of that chapter enumerates what their fathers did that was so wrong and so godless, without God. And I'm convinced that by the grace of God, we're almost going to have to start over with the children and steep them in the Word of God, almost like for the first time. I mean, in so many cases, the churches have so watered it down, so corrupted it, so infused it with the culture that is so godless that it's almost unrecognizable as God's truth anymore. We're going to have to start over, laying a new foundation. My feeling is that the university probably is going to get a lot smaller. There used to be 45, 50 years ago, most of the Bible-believing churches still were pretty much practicing the kind of Christianity that we practice to this day at BJU. But in the last 45 or 50 years, many of them have contemporized to look more and more like the culture, less and less distinctive as belonging to Christ, more apologetic for the truth, more of the blending of the truth with error in many cases, or language that neutralizes the truth at least. So it's not recognizable anymore. Where are you going to find God's truth? It's pretty hard to find today. Unwatered down, unadulterated. Well, by the grace of God, we don't ever want that. We'd rather close the doors. God can do without the university very, very well. He just picked it up. He used it. He can get rid of it when He wants to. But as long as there is one, we have to be true to the truth. And if that means a shrinking institution, that's okay. For 20 years, I've told the faculty we're probably going to get a lot smaller. Because where are the churches that want what we have anymore? The Christian schools are getting smaller. Brother Leslie and I were talking about that a while ago. They're getting smaller. Parents don't want to pay the bills. They're secular in their thinking. they have goals for their kids that are basically materialistic. The things of God are, they're there for Sunday, but it's not for the rest of life. And so that they can find schools that are accommodating to that kind of thought and idea about what Christianity is. But by God's grace, we want to be there for the remnant, if God sees fit to let us be there. I look here at the Sneedens, who he led in prayer. I asked the blessing a while ago. They're out here trying to plant a church in Southern California. Others of you have done that in your lifetime here as well. And what a great need there is. I tell our young people who are not ministerial graduates, I said, give the first 3 years to God right out of college. Put your career on hold. Forget your major. Go find a pioneering church somewhere that needs somebody who's trained in the Scriptures. Somebody maybe with musical abilities, secretarial abilities, somebody who can be a prayer partner to this pastor who's out there kind of all alone at the end of the world somewhere trying to establish a beachhead for God. Go as his lay partner. Cook hamburgers. Do what you have to do. Forget your degree. Give at least 3 years. The Mormons give 2. You can give 3. And you know what? These lay students I've been saying this now for 20 years. They've been taking this up. And they're all over in these churches. And you know what? When that happens, they don't become pew sitters when they go out. They get active that first 3 years, and that's the flow of their life from then on. It's all about the Lord. And our job's what we do to put food on our table, but our life's about the Lord. Well, you pray, please, that it would stay that kind of place. Some of you have asked about Stephen. Thank you for your concern and prayers. A year ago, he got vertigo. A Mayo Clinic doctor down in Florida said he had a damaged nerve in one ear. That is the result of 2 serious ear infections he had August a year ago. And he said it will just take time to heal. Well, we've been waiting a year now. And Lord, you could touch that ear. Please heal him. Now he's found a Cleveland Clinic doctor that thinks it's something called migrainosis, kind of a pernicious migraine condition. I didn't even know that there was such a thing. I thought it's just an occasional headache, but sometimes it affects the head, sometimes nausea, sometimes vertigo. But anyway, he's in the hand of God, and God's teaching him and all of us. He has a great administrative team. The school's going on by the grace of God, and the faculty and students are very gracious and understanding and prayerful. But if he exerts himself, he preaches a 30-minute sermon, he's wiped out for 3 or 4 days, and he's just basically incapacitated. He's on a medical leave this semester at the request of the board, hoping that the rest would speed the healing of the nerve. But it's in the hand of the Lord, and it's all part of the perfecting and purging and purifying process of his life and all of our lives. And so we're content with that. But the ship's been without a captain for a year, and we hope God will see fit to bring him back soon. But thank you for your concern and prayers. Now, I want you to meet Dr. Mike Gray of the science faculty. Dr. Mike Gray is one of those choice servants of God. We have about 1,400 people on the faculty and staff at the university, giving his life in the training of scientists. We're here tonight to he will talk briefly about the Science and Engineering Endowment. It was started in 2005. One of our graduates, who is a physician, a cardiac surgeon in Philadelphia, said, the cost of training engineers and scientists and doctors is a lot more than some of the other majors, and there's no additional tuition for that. It's robbing some of the other majors of funds that they could be using. And he said, I'll give $1 million to this Science and Engineering Endowment. We need to have $10 million. I'll give $1 million. I was very grateful, of course. We don't have many gifts like that. And so we began, and it's grown slowly, and I think it's about $4 million now. But every summer, the interest off of what has been raised goes to the enhancement of the faculty who are teaching in these areas through seminars and writing and workshops and things, and the students are really benefiting from that. But he'll tell you more about that. But it occurs to us at the university that the sciences, medicine, we have about 250 students in our nursing program. We have, he'll tell you more, several hundred in the sciences and the pre-med programs. That part of the world is bereft of a lot of Christians. I mean, almost everybody there is an evolutionist. You know, they've been trained that way, don't know any better, never had the good sense to ask the questions that we heard Brother Tom talk about a while ago. And if there's ever a place that the influence of the Lord needs to be and seldom goes, it's in the scientific and medical world. What an opportunity. What a mission field. So, Dr. Gray and his colleagues feel this huge burden to invest their lives in people like this, men and women like this. And God has really blessed them in that. They have evangelistic hearts, and they're training these people in their skills to go out and use them in evangelistic ways in a world devoid of the gospel. So, Dr. Gray, would you come and tell us a little bit about this, please?
Well, I feel connected in many ways with you folks here. Many of my former students are here, and I am grateful to see you walking in truth, as the Apostle John said, and that's a great reward in itself. Probably every other week I hear from somebody who's a graduate who's expressing appreciation, and I just feel completely unworthy to accept the appreciation. It's been my joy to be at the university teaching. This is my 31st year. I feel connected too because I actually lived in California for 3 years of my preschool years. I remember them vaguely. My grandfather actually retired to Chula Vista. I visited him on a couple of occasions just down the road here. And I am not a Southerner. I was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and the year I came to Bob Jones, 1967, I was the only student from Utah there. In fact, I had other students who asked me if Utah was a state, and I assured them it was. That was the situation for 2 more years until my brother came, and then there were 2 of us from Utah. Fortunately, things have changed in Utah, praise the Lord. I think there were only 3 sound churches when I was a student, and that situation is much different now. But I was in public education. I was educated by Mormon evolutionists. Wild combination. And as someone who had, from his teens, been interested in science, I didn't know how to put those 2 together. I mean, you think about 1967, and the Bible science movement had really not blossomed yet. Basically had Henry Morris's work on the Genesis flood, which was not accessible to high schoolers. And a lot of people didn't understand really how you put the Bible and science together. And I was certainly not one who had it put together either. And had I not come to Bob Jones, I'll tell you, I would be, I have no doubt in my mind, I would be a theistic evolutionist. Simply because I was in my formative thinking process at that point, and I wasn't hearing any answers from the Bible community. I really wasn't, about how you put those together. It was 2 different compartments, and I was committed to Christ, but I was also trying to make sense out of the world from a scientific viewpoint, and I wasn't able to do it. So I came in 1967, drove all the way across from Utah to South Carolina, having never been on the campus of Bob Jones. And almost immediately was in a position where I started to get some answers. Dr. Joe Henson, who for decades was on the board of Institute for Creation Research, was active in teaching then, and those years I would take nothing for, really. They're invaluable in shaping my thinking. I started to see the compatibility. I started to see how shallow I had been in my interpretation of the first chapters of Genesis. Lots of things happened those first few semesters. One of the things that I never envisioned happening was something like this moment here. I was telling Dr. Jones this evening before we came over that I was the quintessential introverted nerd when I came to Bob Jones. I was. And if you gave me a chance, I would still be that. But I have... God put me in a position to, do just exactly the opposite of what my human nature inclines me toward. And I'm grateful because it reminds me all the time that I am completely dependent on God. And there's no way that anything is going to get done if He doesn't do it through me. So I'm trusting that will happen again tonight as He has been faithful to me over my life. So my history with Bob Jones starts in '67 as a student and starts as a faculty member in 1981. So this is now my 31st year. And I have to say that what we're dealing with in the university as a whole, but particularly we're talking about the sciences tonight, is this idea of a thoroughly biblical view of life. I mean, with nothing untouched, with nothing compartmentalized, not just the science, but every area of life brought into captivity, as this verse tells us. That I am still in the business of trying to conform my thinking to what God says is true about the world. And that's what we want for our students. And we try and make that happen by the way in which we teach them. We try and teach them in a way where they are able to express themselves, where they're answering questions, where we're dealing with their concerns, and where it's not adding up for them, that we are engaging them in a thinking process. The building that we inhabit in the sciences, this is a mosaic on the front of the building. It ought to say something to you, if you can read it. It says part of Psalm 19 here is right on the front of the building. Psalm 19 verse 1 starts with, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork." And then these phrases come out. "Day unto day utters speech, night unto night showeth knowledge." And probably many of you can carry that on. But that is our mission, emblazoned right on the front of the building to remind all of us who enter there what it's all about. And what we're trying to then do is to give God the glory that's due to His name. I mean, at the root, evolution is Satan's way of robbing God of His glory. God has put a witness that is sufficient in the creation for every person to be confronted with the reality that he's a creature responsible to an all-powerful creator. As one tract that I like to use puts it, God made you and you owe Him. And that's the foundational reality. So to avoid that reality is intellectual suicide. It's personal suicide in terms of your thinking process. It's suicide in terms of your ability to make meaning out of life, to make wise choices. That's a destructive choice from the very beginning. So, yes, we are committed to teaching the truth of God's Word, starting with Genesis 1:1 and moving through consistently all the way through the Bible. So all of us are committed to a view of Genesis that reads it just as the narrative that it is. It isn't poetry. It isn't anything else that you can twist into something other than what it says, which is, as the tract put it, God made you and you owe Him. We are all, in the sciences and everywhere else on the university, committed to that proposition and the way that it is fleshed out through the rest of Scripture. Now, God has given us a tremendous faculty in the sciences, which is what I'm going to concentrate on. So I'm just going to quickly give you kind of a state of affairs here. This is Brian Vogt, who is chairman of the chemistry department. He's been at BJU for 28 years. Chemistry faculty numbers 5 PhDs, all in their subject areas. This is Bill Lovegrove, who is chairman of the engineering and physics departments. He's been at BJU for 23 years. They have 6 faculty, 4 with a PhD and 1 with an EDD with a concentration in physics. And this is yours truly in an unguarded moment. Somebody took a picture. I'm actually listening to a student's question here. And I'm chairman of the biology department. As I say, I've been there now. This is my 31st year. We have 7 faculty, all with a PhD except one who has an MD, who's teaching our anatomy and physiology, and I'll tell you more about him in a minute. We do have strong programs. This is actually one of the growth areas for the university, and probably you just look at the job market and the demographics and you could probably figure out that would be true. People are increasingly making choices that lead them to the sciences. In the biology realm, there are 3 different majors, and nearly equal are the number of biology majors and the number of pre-med majors. We actually have a customized program just for pre-med. And then we have a pre-physical therapy program, so the total number there from year to year is somewhere between 190 and 210 students in that major. Chemistry has 2 majors, straight chemistry and biochemistry and molecular biology, which is a growing new program. And then physics and engineering are in fact the 2 majors. Physics is smaller, engineering is bigger. We have good facilities. We actually have 2 buildings joined together, which is not real obvious here, and you can see the mosaic on the front of the building there. This is a back view to just show where the 2 buildings join, and the building behind here, our programs have grown enough that we had to boot computer science out a year ago and send them to another building because we needed their facilities. So biology's got a bigger footprint in the first building that you saw, and engineering has a bigger footprint in the second building, the building behind here. We do have great facilities. We have, this is part of an anatomy and physiology lab that was just upgraded a year ago. This is a molecular biology lab that was just built a year ago. So we continue to have needs, and those needs the Lord meets. That renovation project was about $1 million. And part of the renovation, there's a little bit of strange buzz on campus because when we upgraded our anatomy and physiology, this is a room adjacent, which is where cadaver dissection takes place. We have an upper level course for pre-meds and biology majors. We got feedback from them, those many who are in medical school, and they felt like our program's very strong but could be even stronger and gave us some suggestions. This was one of those. So this was last year when the building was just done and that box is not inhabited, but this year it is inhabited. And the students are able to get a firsthand experience like they're going to get in medical school that will pave the way for even better performance. We are a teaching institution, unapologetically so. To the extent that we do research, it is not the tail that wags the dog, it's part of the educational experience. And we value teaching excellence. This is Bill Lovegrove in an engineering classroom. Working with students, teaching them about robotics, which is something that he is particularly skilled at. So working on actually, they construct a couple of robots every year as a capstone project in the engineering department. This is actually a new faculty member, an MD here, who just took early retirement, came to teach for us, Mark Chetta. And the students, this is actually day one of physiology and anatomy. They're preparing to, sorry, we've just eaten. Do something with these scalpels and the body, which is not visible here. We'll just leave it at that. There's also computerized physiology interface experiment equipment there, and so they do EKGs and EEGs and so forth in the classroom, hook each other up to electrodes and take various measurements and do a variety of things there. So we have a rigorous program. These are actually the officers of the Pre-Medical Association, which numbers about 100 students. One of the things that our students do, just again this academic side that tries to be as thorough in preparing students as possible, is we created a course a couple of years ago where they do a medical internship at Greenville Hospital System. So they actually go down and they rotate through all the services of the hospital. They scrub into surgery. They are able to witness things and be involved in things that are eye-opening and help them to determine whether God wants them in medicine as a career. We do have an emphasis for our students that's different from a lot of schools, and that is to teach them to think like scientists. Well, scientists design and conduct experiments. And so that actually starts from their very first semester. We try and minimize the amount of memorization that goes on and maximize the amount of progress that they make in terms of mastering the thinking process of a professional. So there are a variety of situations. This is a student actually in a research lab designed to protect them and the sample, something called a laminar flow hood here. And so there is this intensive, picking up pace over their 4 years, involvement in the conduct of science. This is not what one of my colleagues derisively calls making blueberry muffins. This is real science. This is not following a cookbook recipe, and I don't have any idea why I'm doing this step, but I'm doing it because I want the grade in here. So we're producing students who are extraordinarily competent in their particular domains, thinking like a biologist, a chemist, whatever. For instance, our biochemistry and molecular biology program, which is the newest, less than 5 years old, graduates from that program, we have one graduate from this past year who was accepted in PhD programs at University of Virginia, at Washington University, and at Duke, and decided to go to Washington University. She said there wasn't anybody at Duke that she felt like she wanted to work for after her interview. But God has given our students favor with secular folks, even secular folks who disagree violently with where they're coming from. I mean, in biology, for instance, one of the statements that's often made by secular biologists, quoting a famous evolutionist of the 50s, is that nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. So if you come in denying that central tenet, you're off balance immediately with them. And the only thing possible is that God will give you favor in their eyes, that He will show them that you are completely competent, that your training suits you well for this, and you are just different, which is perfectly all right. Gives you lots of springboard. That was my case in graduate school. It was a very short period of time, really about 2 semesters before there was, let's not talk about that anymore. I don't want to talk about evolution. Let's talk about something else. So that's what I mean about God giving favor. These are students in the engineering major working on a robot. That happens every year. That's a capstone project. To give you an idea, this robot is one of two, and is created. I know it doesn't look much like a robot, does it? This is part of a unmanned vehicle competition that our students enter every year. It's held in Michigan, actually partly supported by the Department of Defense. On land, it's the kind of thing that drones do in the air. Okay, that's what they're looking at eventually, that, battlefields will not be infantry against infantry. It'll be my robots against your robots. And that's where things are moving. So the rules get more involved every year. The Department of Defense wants to keep pushing this forward. And that means last year's robot probably won't even place next year. And therefore, a new robot needs to be constructed every year. Our students last year, we had two teams, and one team took 7th place against teams like Virginia Tech, Caltech, Georgia Tech, Carnegie Mellon. And our 7th place was with undergraduate students and a $2,000 robot. First place was graduate students and a $30,000 robot. So that, I think, testifies to the strength of the engineering department in particular. This is a summer program that Dr. Bob referred to, and because we are about teaching excellence, we want to try and make our faculty as effective as they possibly can be. There's this funny thing. I don't know if you ever noticed it or even thought about it going to college, but college teachers don't get trained how to teach. Do you know that? There's just this assumption you have a PhD, you know your subject, and therefore you must be able to teach. And of course, many of you I'm seeing shaking heads, and the answer is not necessarily. Not necessarily. So this is actually one of the things that the Science and Engineering Endowment has made possible. This was a dream for 20 years that I had, and God made it possible in 2004. We actually had our first fundraising effort for the endowment in 2003, and people, after we explained the concept, were so enthusiastic. I remember several people saying to me, can you actually do that this summer? And I said, well, actually, I think I need a year's lead time before we could possibly implement. But this has been revolutionary for our faculty. We have 17, 18 faculty, and last summer, 14 of them were in residence for 10 weeks, working through a philosophy of teaching, not just busy work, not just being on the payroll for the summertime, but needing to be productive. What we have is a philosophy that we call a three-legged stool. And the first one is the hardest one. What we try and get faculty to do is to embrace the fact that they're going to have to think clearly if they're going to communicate clearly. Now you say, yeah, but they have PhD degrees. I know that. Sometimes they have 30 years, 40 years of experience. I know that. And yet, they don't exactly have in mind how somebody who's not as bright as they are would learn this. In fact, it's sometimes called the curse of knowledge. Because you know it, you figure it's easy for everybody else. And the fact is you may not know how you came to know it, which is really bad for a classroom. You better figure that out before you get in a classroom about how somebody else would learn this. What is the optimal way of gaining an understanding, not just being exposed to information, but actually gaining an understanding that will stick with you and provide you tools for thinking. So that's actually the toughest summer. That's the entry summer into the program. This takes a minimum of 3 summers, actually more like 5, to get through the whole program. And we hired 2 new faculty last year in biology and 1 in physics, and they went through this program in the summertime. About 5 years ago, we hired 2 faculty, and they went through this program, and they'd never taught before, which I think may be a blessing, because they were teachable and hungry. And what happened was essentially their first year was not like anybody's first year I've ever seen. It was like they didn't have those kinds of communication problems that are so common, especially among first-year teachers. So we really try and ground them in clear thinking, and then in the classroom, in getting their ideas across. Now, I'm trying to restrain myself here, but part of the model is we call on people all the time. We engage people in discussion. I teach at our church as well, and that model still works there. I actually call on people. If nobody's answering my question, I just call on people, and they know to expect that. And then finally, kind of where the rubber meets the road is, and this is usually at least the third summer, is assessing in a way that people are actually held accountable for real understanding. Not for recall, not because I memorized it, but because I understand it. And it's hard to write those kinds of questions, but when students are faced with those are authentic assessments of whether they really understand or whether they're just repeating things back that they heard. So that's a brief glimpse of what goes on in the summertime, and we've had now 7 summers of that program, and virtually everybody in the sciences has been trained. And one of the things, I never envisioned would happen, but it has, is that we have amazing camaraderie in the sciences. I mean, there's no divisional, this department and that department and my needs and your needs. It's like we're all on the same page. We have worked through this together. We have talked through things. We recognize what our priorities are. We respect one another for what we do in the classroom. It's just been wonderful. I mean, there are no people that we're closer to than our colleagues that we work with every day. We all look forward to the summer where we can spend more time together. One other thing that the Science and Engineering Endowment is poised to be able to do is to support an effort in cancer research. Now, a minute ago I said, we're a teaching institution, and we are. But by the time you get to be a senior, particularly if you're a biology major or biochemistry and molecular biology major, you need to be in a situation where you're actually applying that to doing real world research. And so we have 3 rooms, for those of you who've been on campus, back in the Barge Hospital. This room actually was where 2 of my kids were born, but it didn't look like this. This is the old operating room in Barge, and we've got 2 adjoining rooms. And we have a cancer research facility set up there, just waiting for a full-time director. We currently have a part-time director, who's Dr. Amy Tuck, over on this side, dressed in black so you could tell her apart from the students. She was my student years ago. And her PhD is in cancer research, so she's well equipped to do the job, but her first love is teaching in the classroom, and we're trying to get her in a position where she can do that. So those are things that have already happened. So let me just say what our needs are, and the endowment has made these possible. This program we call the Summer Institute in Teaching Science actually costs about $100,000 a summer, okay? And we do that every summer. And you say, well, you've got slow learners, huh? They're not getting it. We just have to keep coming back. Well, learning how to teach is part of it, but where the rest of it is actually developing curriculum that's thoroughly biblical and that does the things that we talked about. Because there are no textbooks that do that. Okay, you're going to have to create your own path through this. You can use textbooks as references, but the kind of thing that we're talking about, conceptual learning, is something that's only given lip service in the educational community. We're talking about actually making it happen in the curriculum. And then, of course, science doesn't stay the same either. So, you're on this endless loop kind of thing where every few years you're going to have to revisit a course because things have changed drastically. So that's what goes on in the summer in that program. The basic cancer research lab operation, when we have a full-time director on board, will cost us, just for basic operation, no equipment, supplies, will be about $50,000 a year. And that's scheduled to happen very soon as we can get our director retired from his job with his house sold. We have a director already contingently hired who's been working for 25 years for Abbott Laboratories, who Lord willing, come down and join us this fall. What we would like to do, so this is future here, but this is something the endowment could help with, is that we would like students to have a learning experience in the research lab in the summertime for 8 to 10 weeks. Basically, what they have to do is give up a summer job, and it's adding insult to injury if they also have to pay to have this experience. So what we would like are scholarships to defray the cost of the summer experience. So we'd like to support 20 students between the departments who are actively engaged in doing the kind of thing that could be doing as professionals, and not have the problem that we have during the school year, which is I've still got other classes to deal with, so I'm kind of fragmented. So these are things that concretely we're grateful the endowment has already done, and things that we could envision the endowment doing that would further strengthen our program. Dr. Bob?
I find it easier just to drop it in my pocket than to find my belt. You got half the part right. I'm not Dr. Bob, I'm just Bob. And I'm not an alumnus, I'm just a friend. But I'm a friend that fought my way through the University of Minnesota as a astronomy and chemistry major, in finding that every direction I turned as a believer, I was ridiculed. I was defamed as being less than smart, finding it very difficult to come out with A's and find the professor say, yes, you got good grades in your test, but you are one of those creationists. And so I don't understand how you could get grades like that, the kind of insanity that you face. And finding that a school like Bob Jones University, where you can have your faith and your academics together and they come hand in hand as they should, is a delight that I then, as a scientist, as a communicator, as a person that was working at the Boeing company for 30 years, and having two children that I wanted to have be students that could have that kind of honesty in their college preparation, took this chance living in Seattle to send my children 3,000 miles away to a school I'd never seen before. But I'd met some of the alumni, and I was impressed with those alumni and the way that they stood for the Lord and were also outstanding in their professional fields. And so it seemed obvious to me that, 30 years is long enough to sell airplanes, and taking early retirement to do something significant with my life. And that was to be able to come on and say, I would like to be able to share with the West Coast what Bob Jones is all about. 3,000 miles is a long way to get information out. And finding in the last couple of months, the two questions that people say is, why haven't I ever heard about this school before? I've been looking for a school like this. I didn't know it existed, and that's exciting to hear that. And the other is, how can I help? I want to send some kids there. There's other things that I would like to do. So I know that evening is getting late, and you know that this is the part where we would say, wouldn't you like to participate? Oh no, grab your wallets at that point. But I think you've heard clearly from Dr. Bob especially that we trust upon the Lord to do his work. And the joy that we have is finding as the Lord, who is very gracious, reaches into the hearts of his children and teaches them to be very gracious. And so we wanted to share an area in the Science Endowment that if the Lord did speak to you in wanting to support this, support it with finances, supporting it with prayers, and supporting it with spiritual gifts that you have, of sharing it with other people as opportunities as the Lord leads you. And we want to make sure you have that opportunity. We've placed some brochures, and I'll just go quickly through this because I know the evening's getting late. Feel free to take that green brochure that's there that speaks a little bit about the Science and Education Endowment. There's a card that also is next to that that says if this is something that the Lord has led you to want to participate in now or later on, bring that along also. Now, I've only been doing this a couple of months. And so one thing that on this being a first gathering coming together, the envelopes that you're supposed to put those in, I didn't bring those. And so I'm going to get 2 demerits from Dr. Bob for that. I might get kicked out. And so if you did want to fill that out tonight and leave it on your table, feel free to do that, or also to send it to the school at your convenience. But no, we don't have a hard sell in this. When you see what is happening in science at the school, when you know that as you look at the world today, the groundwork for the future is the area of science. This is where the world is moving. Think of what you're reading in the paper the last 2 days when Steve Jobs has passed away. Of the whole world laments this because science is and technology is what the future is. And that's where the pagans are. And it isn't an intellectual problem, it's a spiritual problem. And to be able to have young women and young men to learn that science and to learn the biblical groundwork of God creating this and sending them as missionaries into the industry of science and seeing that as their mission field, not a profession, but their mission field, but to have the excellence and competence to be those excellent professionals so they grow in favor with God and in favor with man and have that balanced life of high academics and high spiritual commitment. So we would encourage you to pray on how the Lord would lead you to be involved in this area, and especially in the science and engineering endowment that is preparing students for the future to take their stand in the technology area. So that's something for you to consider this evening. Dr. Bob, if you could wrap this up with a word of prayer tonight, and then we'll be able to dismiss.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you, Dr. Gray. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience and your interest. We have the welcome mat is out for you. Please come back and visit. I know it sounds kind of crazy being this far away, but sometime or other, your travels will likely bring you to the southeast. There's a welcome mat out for you. We have several silos full of grits. We have an okra farm, and we know how to make cornbread. So how could you not want to come? Thank you for this evening. Thank you all so much.